It's the February show with Barb from Dover Apothecary. Barb, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing, Dave?
Really good, thanks. Keeping busy and enjoying the winter weather. This month, we wanted to talk a little bit about mental health. I know this is a common subject in all areas of our Your Health page on Facebook that we talk about, but it's so important and so critical. And you're sort of looking at it from the other side of the things, what you need to do as far as your diet and your vitamins and how to keep that body sustainable to help deal with maybe certain stresses in your life. Is that kind of a good outlook on what we're going to talk about today?
That's good. That's accurate. And I mean, it is based on, between my home practice and people coming in and reaching out at the apothecary, is seeing that need in the community, seeing where people are struggling the most. And foundationally, if we don't have those tools when we're not experiencing these kinds of severe stressors, then we're certainly not going to cope well when we are dealing with them, and especially if they're going on long term. And that's something, unfortunately, that over the last couple of years, people haven't had the proper kind of closure with the loss of loved ones, or even with the advent of somebody new coming into the world, is that connectivity has been very, very strained in a lot of ways. And so people are having a much, much more difficult time trying to process and to regulate themselves and their life. And it's a very real heartache for people. And, myself as a very empathetic person, and Mike as well, it's very difficult to watch people going through those. So, that self-care and that understanding of how we need to nurture ourselves through difficult times in our lives is I thought February is a good month to talk about taking heart.
You said two words in there that I want to sort of expand on: long term. If you're under stress long term and you're not eating right, the process is going to take longer, is it not, to correct those problems, both mentally and physically?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have to look at the elevated stress levels and what that actually does to our heart health. That people can be much more predisposed to a number of chronic or acute conditions when they're under these types of stress. And the longer the stress goes on, the more inflammation is in a person's body. So that's where the diet becomes much more critical, where regulating sleep cycles, making sure we're getting the appropriate exercise and not feeling isolated. It's really, really important that people don't withdraw into themselves, but that they're getting either counseling or have a group of friends that's very supportive. And as individuals, watching somebody that we care about that's going through these types of issues, it's very important that we check what we say. It's more about being than doing or saying. It's letting that person know, because we can easily say something that's a bit of a trigger for the individual, not knowing where they are throughout this process. So more important that you're, getting together, reaching out, maybe dropping off something, but, trying to get that person just to know that you are there for them. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just to follow up on that, because you did mention about people sort of internalizing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are if you are out in an area, one of the things I'm going to ask you this is: a pet makes a huge difference too, right? Takes the stress off.
Pets can be massively helpful to people. Volunteering can be helpful, even if you don't, excuse me, have a pet yourself. There's nothing wrong with borrowing somebody else's dog to take for a walk. It makes you get out there. But yes, those sorts of situations, there's no judgment with an animal. They're just happy to see you.
Yep.
They're happy to lap up the love that you're willing to share with them. And it does bring comfort. It can regulate, somebody with high blood pressure, it can bring your blood pressure down. They can scientifically monitor that response in the person. So, having something or someone that unconditionally you can love or that can love you back can be huge. I know for myself, having the blessing of grandchildren through the difficult times, it'll be 10 years this month since I lost my sister, Kathy. And with having lost my dad during COVID, not to COVID, but during COVID and the unusual circumstances where you can't be with that loved one, having my grandchildren was a godsend. I just don't know how well I would have coped if I didn't have their joyful little faces to, and not everybody has that. Not everybody has extended family. And so that's when foundationally the nutritional tools become so important. This time of year, vitamin D3, I can't stress enough how much we need that particular nutrient because we're not getting the sunshine that prompts that production in our body. And oftentimes Mike and I will recommend, 4,000 to 5,000 international units. Prefer that it's backed up with the blood work to show what a person's levels are. But generally at this time of year, that's a good dosage for people to take. The form of vitamin D3 is very important. It should be a soft gel or drops. Those dry tablets have poor absorption. So we coach people a lot on which supplement, which ones are of more efficacy to the body because not everything's absorbed the same way. Your B complex vitamins, they're literally the fuel for our central nervous system. So the way our body responds helps give us energy, but it also helps relax us. But it does create a soothing balm for the central nervous system and helps to calm us. And generally under times of extreme stress, we can't, even with the best diet, get enough of certain nutrients. So that's where therapeutic dosing comes in. That's where in my practice, that's kind of my forte, is helping people with, the amount of that nutrient that they need. And having a session, a nutritional consultation, do have some counseling background as well, not grief counseling specifically. That's out of my scope of practice, but definitely having that connection with somebody that has the knowledge to get you the tools that you need.
Well, and it sounds like what you're chatting about today is sort of building that base through nutrition to make sure that your body's reacting properly to situations under a lot of stress. And then that secondary, obviously, well, it's equal, is dealing with that on the mental side of it and how you're going to cope. With the supplements that you provide, in every body is different. I get that every person has a different situation. Does it increase it dramatically? Like, do you say, boy, this will probably create a 10% increase in function? Is there numbers to back that? Like, can you say that or no?
So to give an absolute measure of the potential improvement for an individual would be difficult to say. Yeah. I guess when I do a baseline nutrient assessment with a client,
you're seeing the deficiencies.
Within 1 to 3 months, we see massive improvements in those deficiencies.
You can't measure that, but physically and mentally. Okay.
Right. Yeah. And we do have to take into account what somebody's gut health is like, because if they have a lot of inflammation intestinally, that's governing how the brain is functioning, okay? Because 20% of those nutrients we've talked about are what are feeding the cells in the brain, because your gut is your second brain. So we have to take care of the whole body. It has to be that holistic approach. And never is that more important than when we're undergoing severe stressors in our life, whatever that be, whether it's, loss of a loved one, whether it's healing from an injury, suffering from a chronic condition, seeing a loved one going through a really difficult treatment time, perhaps with cancer. So all of those things need an increase in self-care. So I think, for February, for Heart month that let's look at self-compassion as well as compassion for others. And, as a community, we have so many people available to us that are willing to be our beacon of light. And, just for people to not think that they're going through these struggles alone. Because once you start to talk to other people, you recognize how many other people are struggling and hurting as well.
So I'm going to throw a scenario at you,
Okay.
and just because of what we're talking about, what we've seen in the last 6 months is huge increases in supermarket costs as far as fresh vegetables, food, and I know when you go on a program, it costs money. Mm-hmm. For a low-income family, you got a couple kids, your husband, your wife. Is there a vitamin that you recommend to start with just to get something going in the right direction? Is there anything that you could say to them? We talked a lot about getting out in the sunshine's critical, but, if that's all they can afford to get started, what would you say? Especially like this time of year, like you said, with all the stress.
Okay. The biggest thing is to steer away from processed and ultra processed foods. They are nutrient robbers.
Okay.
All right. So they will be detrimental to the point that every little bit of good you're doing for yourself is being taken away by those foods. So looking at, and there are apps out there where you can make a super stew out of vegetables that are less than perfect. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I think we talked about that, in a previous show, is that using a slow cooker, slowly simmering things in a pot. So if you've got leftover, bones or a little bit of leftover meat, you can make a super hearty and very easy meal that will nourish your family much more deeply than anything that comes prefab. The difference between using brown rice over white rice. Okay, so those whole grains, they still have your B vitamins in them. Whereas the white flour, the white rice, the things that have been processed to cook faster, they're less nutritious. They've been fortified with synthetic nutrients, but that's not the same. Synthetic nutrients, it's the same when you buy those cheaper grade vitamins. They're synthetic. Your body uses half of that potency to convert it to something that it recognizes and can absorb. So paying a little bit more for those quality supplements, there is a true reason. If your family is very, very nutritionally challenged and those dietary things are not available to you, then a good quality multivitamin, even though it's only the minimum recommended daily allowance to keep a person alive and avoid certain conditions, like scurvy and rickets and things like that. It's not a therapeutic level of anything, but it will cover those bases for somebody. And most pharmacies have a program, especially for women that are pregnant, but even talk to the pharmacist, see whether there's something that they can help your family with, because we want our communities to be healthier. We're here for you, and we recognize those struggles. We see them every day.
Cool. I'm sorry to keep you so long today. Thanks for doing this. A great topic. I love when we get to talk about the mental health and how food can help that whole capacity. Really appreciate your time today, Barb. Have a great month.
Yes, you too.